Hello, hello. It is I, Gordon Firemark, with a Q&A session, asked and answered, entertainment law questions. You've got the questions, I've got the answers, and just thought I'd come on live and do this, talk for a while, and see what comes of it. See who's got questions and who's wondering things about this mysterious field of entertainment law. So I guess we'll just jump right in. I have a few questions that people submitted to me in advance, and while I'm waiting for folks to join in, hello and welcome. We're just going to start answering a few questions. So I had a question, a few weeks ago, maybe a week or so ago. No, it's a little longer than that. Anyway, a fellow named Keith wrote in to ask me. He says, I want to use some music for a video game, and I was wondering what a royalty-free license is and how is it used. And so I answered by email, but I thought I would go back to Keith now here. Royalty-free, when it's referring to music or clips or photos and things like that, it's really more of a marketing term than a legal term, and it's a little bit misleading. So you have to read the license terms carefully for these kinds of things, because it doesn't mean that the work is free to use without paying anything. It doesn't mean that the work is in the public domain. Copyright is still intact for a royalty-free image or song or something like that. And it doesn't mean, again, that the work is free for anyone to use. You still pay for that license, but it's a one-time fee most of the time. A better term would be pre-licensed music, because generally what it refers to is music that you pay one time and then you can use it for a specific purpose on either an unlimited or a less limited basis than for in a particular project. Most of the time, most royalty-free music actually does have some kind of particularly in music, it has a royalty obligation. The performing rights organizations, ASCAP and BMI here in the U.S., CSAC is another one, and PRS in the Great Britain, and SOCAN in Canada. These organizations collect royalties on behalf of songwriters and music publishers, and what they're doing is collecting and distributing those royalties for the performance of the music. So many times, a royalty-free music still requires that royalties are paid by the venue or the radio station or the broadcaster rather than by the creator of the content. And this is how composers and music owners make some of their money in actual fact. Certain Exposures is saying hello. Thank you for that. Nice to see you. You told me your name last week and I've promptly forgotten it, but thank you anyway for being here. And, so the royalty-free, like I said, it's more of a marketing term than a legal term. And you really do need to read those licenses carefully. Some of the royalty-free music libraries, it's buy once and use it as many times as you like, although that's becoming more and more rare. The other model is the single-use license. So you pay each time you use a piece of music from that royalty-free library in a new project. So you can use it in a single project, a single video, a single podcast episode, or what have you, and only pay once. But if you make another episode and you use that music again, like, for example, let's say it's your theme song or something like that, then you're going to pay for it each time. That's the risk or the concern with single-use license terms. So you've got to read it really carefully and make sure you're getting what you think you're getting. Thank you, Daniel, for reminding me of your name. Single-use license. The other model that I find pretty good these days is Epidemic Sound. They and a few others now are in basically a subscription music library where you pay a monthly fee to have access to the music, and you can use anything in their library in any projects that you want while you are a subscriber to the service. And they've got big libraries of really good quality music. And as long as you remain a subscriber, you're free to use their stuff. And, one of the things people ask is, well, what happens when I let the subscription lapse? And the way they've got it set up is that those things that you've used it in, the projects you've used it in prior to the lapse, remain grandfathered in. So it's a pretty good deal, especially if you're making content on a very regular basis for, the price of a couple of cups of coffee, $15 or so, I think is what you pay for Epidemic. You can have access to a really great quality library of music. So there you go. Another question that came in a few days, actually, I saw this one in a Facebook group, asking the question, feeling a lot of confusion around the legal requirements for my kind of digital business, which is an online course business. I'm American, so I assume the business needs to be registered in the US in some way. But as a fully virtual business, how is this kind of business licensed? Do I need an LLC? Googling has left me confused. Any and all resources are greatly appreciated. So the short answer here is there is no specific requirement that you do anything to register your business. You can start up as a solo proprietor, and just one person, one business. The business is you. You are the business. You do what you do, and you take responsibility for it, as well as receiving the rewards from it. And that's very common and not at all unusual or I won't make a value judgment, good or bad. There are risks associated with that. If something happens with the business and you end up winding up being sued for breach of contract or copyright infringement, or somebody slips and falls while they're at your place, or those kinds of things, you, the person, are entirely liable for their injuries, for those losses and damages. Whereas if you form a company like an LLC, you have a shield against liability. The company is liable, but the owners of the company would not be. So that's one of the big advantages for forming an LLC, but it is by no means a requirement that you do so. Registering a business isn't really a thing unless you need to accept payments in the name of the business, like checks being made out to your business instead of to you individually. And in that case, the simplest strategy is to file a fictitious business name statement, also known as a DBA, a doing business as statement. And that is really just a government record of the fact, usually at the county level, registering it with the county clerk to let them know this is who's behind this business. And it gets published in the media, in the newspaper a few times usually. And now if somebody wants to come for you and sue you or reach out to you for some other reason, there's a record of how to do that. And so you're not just, hiding behind a fake name. If you do form an entity, or if you team up with someone else, then you are in what's called a partnership. And that scenario, you are liable for everything that happens in the business, even the stuff that the other partner is responsible for causing to happen. So that's another good reason why, rather than being partners with somebody, it makes sense to form an LLC or something to shield the individuals from the kinds of risks that might come up in that kind of a business. Other requirements, some businesses may require a license if you're doing therapy or offering legal advice or those kinds of things. And that'll be a licensing on the basis of where you live, where you reside, usually that kind of thing. Where should you form your company if you're doing an LLC or a corporation? I generally recommend doing it in the home state where you're located, where either you have a nerve center, that is the brains of the operation, or a muscle center reside and are located, because it just makes sense. That's where you're doing business. And if you have both, well, then sometimes you have to register in the other states as well. But I don't generally recommend forming in, everybody talks about Delaware. Delaware has some very, very attractive laws for larger companies that have lots of shareholders and members, because it really does shield the officers and owners, the directors, I should say, of the business, from liability to those owners, those shareholders and members. But in smaller companies, that is much less of a concern, and a lot can be handled with a simple shareholder agreement or something like that. So anyway, that's the long answer to a short question. What are the legal requirements for an online course business? Of course, you also have to comply with copyright and trademark laws and things like that. And you want to protect your brand by registering a trademark for your course title and any other brands that you might have developed and those kinds of things. And the good news is it's easy to get started and you don't have to do all these things first. So that's good. What else? My friend Russ asked a couple of questions by email this week. So let me talk about one of those. Let's see. I don't use pictures or video with people in them unless they are in a very public places and are not the focus of the photo. So a scene of a downtown street is okay, but if I'm zoomed in on someone sitting at a table on the street, that would probably be over the line for me, he says. But I do a lot of video drone picture work showing manufactured homes, which is the business he's in. Some are behind gated communities. Most are open to public access. I love to take shots of activities like folks in the pool or playing tennis or other outside games like shuffleboard. But if there is a person who's recognizable in the picture, I generally don't use it. Same for meetings or events at a clubhouse, things like that. He says lots of people post pictures of such things on Facebook, and I've never seen a complaint, but I choose not to use them. I'm talking about commercial use on my monetized YouTube channel, my business Facebook page, in my courses, and in advertisements. Not sure if this is what you had. Okay. So advertisements are definitely the kind of commercial use that we think about and want to make sure we're not running afoul of in using people's images. Your Facebook page is a close call. I would probably characterize it as commercial use inside the course. If it's behind a paywall, I would say that's a commercial use. But on a YouTube channel, just because your YouTube channel is monetized, that does not necessarily mean that you're using things in a commercial way. What commercial means in this context is that you're using it for the purpose of promoting and selling something, promoting a transaction. So yeah, your YouTube videos are sort of advertising-y, but there's also monetization. Well, so is a newspaper monetized. Just because the newspaper has classified ads in the back doesn't mean that the editorial content of the newspaper is commercial. And so we do have to sort of make that distinction. If you're telling a story about a scenario and you've captured images or video of people out in a public place, they don't have an expectation of privacy there. They do have a reasonable expectation that their image isn't going to be used for promoting in an ad or promoting a transaction or a sale of some sort. But just to be photographed and be shown in talking about what a wonderful lifestyle that could be in these manufactured homes, that's fair game. And the only other wrinkle in your question, Russell, is some of them are walking in, for example, a private gated community where your drone is overhead, which they don't have a way of blocking access to your drone. But they may have an expectation that they're not being photographed against their will inside the community. And it might make sense to check in with the community's rules and regulations, their covenants. What are they called? Covenants, conditions, and restrictions, I think, is the CC&Rs, right? So that's one. Russell has a second question around testimonials and comments. And he says, I have these in many places. I've received input from my viewers, my students, my fans, telling me how much they like my material. Currently, I ask for permission to use these in my advertising and promotions or anywhere that I might use a testimonial. Do I need that permission, or do I already have it by the fact that they've sent me these comments? If they come in email, are they still considered private? And how about comments in a private Facebook group or so on and so forth? This is really a judgment call, but I generally would say if you're going to use a testimonial that you received from one of these channels, whatever it is, for your commercial use on the sales page of your course or in a sales message email or something like that, then I would say yes, get their permission. And testimonial releases are a thing, and it makes good sense to do that so they don't come at you and accuse you of something. We have a testimonial release over on the site, the store at easylegaltemplates.com if you're interested in something like that. And that's that. So hope you are getting what you need from me there, Russell. Thank you for the question. Let me see another question. By the way, if you have a question, pop it into the comments and the chat, because I'd love to answer some questions in real time. Here's one. This person says, well, I'm not seeking legal advice, but just a topic for discussion. Parody remixes. There are YouTube channels dedicated exactly to this. So the question is, well, LibriVox.org says all of its recordings are in the public domain. And the question is then, could AI train by using a LibriVox audiobook or something and then generate another? Would the transformative nature of the new work and the non-copyrighted nature of the original recording trump the protections for a human actor's likeness? So the short answer here is no. The likeness rights are unrelated and unattached to copyright. So the fact that an actor is performing material that is generated by AI just means that the material is not protected by copyright. That is, anybody else could do their own performance of that material. Likewise, if it's in the public domain, you can use it freely to make your own material. But if the actor has given a performance, well, now that I hear myself saying it, I think that if there's been a recording made of the actor's performance, then somebody owns that recording, except in the case of LibriVox, where they're saying that they've dedicated those to the public domain or something like that. So we have to distinguish between the material that's embodied within the recording and the recording itself. So somebody might own that recording, but not the underlying script, screenplay, text, song, whatever it might be. Here, the questioner goes on to ask, I can't help thinking of Tom Waits versus Frito-Lay, where the courts found in favor of Tom Waits when a human impersonator performed a parody song inspired by his works. In that case, they said there was no more transformative remixing of a Waits recording. It was all a cover recording of, actually not even a cover, it was just a Tom Waits sounding voice, a sound-alike. And what's going on there is that it was used in a commercial, in an ad, right, for Frito-Lay's products. And the audience was able to be confused into thinking that Tom Waits had endorsed the product and was advertising it for them. So he sued under California's right of publicity statute, which specifies that celebrities, or sometimes in ordinary people in California, it's broader. It's everybody has a right to control commercial use of their name or likeness, and in California, the sound of their voice. So because it was a commercial use and it sounded like him, he was able to succeed in that lawsuit. It actually followed by about a year another case involving Bette Midler, in which it actually was a song that she had recorded, but she was not the author of the song. She hadn't written the composition. Her famous recording of Do You Want to Dance is really what made her a star. And it was, sort of her trademark song for a long time. When Ford Motor Company went to make an ad for a new line of cars, they wanted to use the song Do You Want to Dance in a commercial. So they approached the owners of the copyright in the composition, as well as Bette Midler and her record label. And she said, no, I don't do commercial with my stuff. You don't get to use my sound of my voice. So what Frito-Lay did, which is perfectly legal under the law, is to go and get permission from the owner of the composition, the songwriter, and they made a new recording, a cover recording of that song, and they used it in the commercial. The thing is, what they did was they hired one of Bette Midler's backup singers to do it and sound as much like Bette Midler as possible. And it was a remarkably close impersonation of Bette. And so when she started learning that it was out there, people asking her, I thought you didn't do commercial, hey, I guess you finally, saw the money on the writing on the wall and took the money. She realized that it was not her voice, and she sued. And again, she won in a California court, claiming that they had taken a distinctive aspect of her persona, her voice, and used it in a way that was misleading as to the authorship, and it was a commercial use, so she was able to succeed. Daniel's asking, is an email exchange where you ask someone, can I share your photo on my site and on YouTube, followed by a yes, good enough for commercial use like an ad? Well, this is always going to be the big question, Daniel. I would prefer to see a formal depiction release or appearance release or model release or something that makes sure we have all the necessary language, words like consent and irrevocable and all media now known and hereafter devised and those kinds of things. But the short answer is, if you say, can I use your photo on YouTube? and then you do so, and they've said yes, and that you do so, I think they'd have a very hard time proving that there was something unexpected about that there wasn't a meeting of the minds on the terms of their consent. But if you didn't say, for commercial use, if I put it on my website on a sales page, but you didn't say sales page, they thought I was just going to illustrate a blog post or something, maybe there's a bit of an argument there. So that's why it's important to use a writing, because the writing eliminates any arguments about ambiguity or the scope of the consent and those kinds of things. So that's why I generally recommend get a written release so that everybody can point to it and know where the boundaries are, rather than making assumptions or having misapprehensions about it. Because, in order for there to be a binding contract, there has to be a meeting of the minds. And if the plaintiff comes in and says, well, they said one thing, but another thing is what they did, then you end up in a pissing match, basically. A classic example of this, actually, is the Borat movie, the original Borat movie, where he went out, Sacha Baron Cohen, as the character of Borat. They were filming in this sort of guerrilla documentary style, and they did, in fact, get their the people that they filmed with Borat, interacting with him, they got them to sign a contract, and the contract said, we're making a documentary style motion picture, and you're going to be featured, and they paid them something, whatever. Well, a lot of these people were embarrassed when the film came out and said, wait a minute, you said it was a documentary, and what you did was this feature film where you were really making fun of all of these American rubes, basically. And the courts pretty universally, in fact, I'm not aware of any case that went against the filmmakers. It was Warner Brothers and Borat and Sacha Baron Cohen and his production company. The courts held it says documentary style. It doesn't say it's a documentary film. And there's a part of me that wonders, even if it had been taken from a documentary into something else, would that have mattered? They did sign these releases. They knew, or they should have known, what they were getting into when they signed these things. So, getting a written release is always going to be best, because then you've got something to hang your hat on if it comes down to it. So Dana asked me back in January, wow, it's a long time ago now. She says, or he, I don't know. I've shot my film and I'm about to go into post-production, and we put in all of our contracts that the film is currently titled, in quotes, but whatever it is. But now we want to change the title before we lock picture. Are there things to keep in mind we need to do before doing that, since all of our contracts have the current title on them? I don't really think you need to go back and contact all of those people who signed releases just to say, hey, we've changed the title of the film. If it says currently titled, that suggests enough, I think, that there's a chance that the title of the film is going to change. And again, if you've got the written release, you can just show a record of, hey, we changed the title of the film. This is still the same film we were talking about. And, document the fact that the title changed on this day and time, and you're good to go. Dino asks, if I want to use a parody song in a video instead of the original song that was parodied, would I be allowed to use that parody under fair use, or would I be allowed to have someone do a cover of the parody instead of the original song? Well, interesting question. So just because the parody song is a parody of an original does not mean that your use of the parody is also a parody or also fair use. You would need permission from the owner of the parody, and probably also the owner of the original work that was being parodied. Again, unless your film is making fun of, criticizing, commenting on the parody and the original song themselves, in which case maybe you've got a case for fair use. Say you're doing a documentary about fair use or about parody in music, then yes, you're probably okay, because what you're doing is commenting on the genre and using various examples of it as an illustration of those kinds of things. But fair use does not always extend to the secondary use, because you might be using the entire parody song in a way that is not itself fair use. It's a separate copyrighted work. It is not an infringement of the underlying copyright. So, Aaron asks about a character in his film that references a book being his favorite. And in the background, there is a book cover showing in the background. And so I've had trouble getting in touch with the author of the book and asking, would it be an issue to Photoshop a fictionalized cover art of the book, or would it be best to keep seeking a media release from the author? Best case is continue getting the release from the author. Showing the book cover, especially if it's an artistic, not just a leather cover with the title on it, but actually a design of a book cover, there may be copyright issues in that as well. So I would say, get the permission. But this may be one of those where you need to talk to a lawyer and show them what you're talking about so you can get a better assessment of things. Let me see. Well, this is interesting. I read that if a song was released before 1978, the copyright laws differ. I read that it was 50 years after the death of the author. Say a song came out in 1973, but the owner of the song died in 1974. Would that song be public domain, or is each individual copyright a case-by-case basis? Frank is the author of that question. Frank, the answer is this. Works that were created or published prior to 1978, January 1st, 1978, were under the 1909 Copyright Act. And the duration of copyright for works under the 1909 Act was 28 years. And then there was a renewal. You had to file a renewal. You got another 28 years. And then when Congress decided they were going to start getting into making a new copyright law, so in about the mid-60s, I think it was 1966, they said, okay, any new works will be covered by this, and the renewal is, as long as you're in your renewal term, we're giving you an extra 19 years. So it took it out from 28 plus 28, that's 56, another 19 made it 75 years. Any new works created after January 1st, 1978, or on or after January 1st, 1978, had a copyright duration that was tied to the life of the author, the life of the last surviving author, human author. They would have a copyright for life of the author plus 50 years. Then, in 1999, 2000, right around the turn of the century, actually it might have been 2001, the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act was brought around and enacted by Congress, and it added 20 years. So those 75-year-long copyrights now were 95 years. And the life plus 50 now is life plus 70. So in your scenario, a song written in 1973 and then the owner dies in 1974, that song would persist out until 2000 and 70 years from 1974? 2024? No. Yeah. So that would be this year. So it would now fall into the public domain as of January 1st of 2024. So there's 95 years. So we have another 20 years. Forgive me. So it's actually 95 years from the year of publication. So 1973 plus 95 takes us out to 2068. Sorry. So I misspoke earlier. The life plus 50 or life plus 70 is only for works after 78. So pre-1978 work written in 73, the death of the author is irrelevant. We count out 95 years ahead. That 95-year thing this year became very big because we heard about Mickey Mouse falling into the public domain. The Steamboat Willie movie was created released 95 years ago in what is that, 1929, right? So 2024 is the 95th year, and it is now in the public domain. So that's that. Sherry's asking about, as an elementary school teacher going out into doing her own at-home daycare, can I use a classroom school photo of myself and students on the new website if I blot out the students' faces? So this is a multi-part question. One part is relating to the students' faces. Can you do that? Yes. I think if you blot out their faces, you are not using their likenesses in a commercial way, and that's fine. However, the photograph itself is a copyrighted work and it belongs to someone. And it's one thing that they gave you a copy of the photo for your own personal, memory books and things like that. But either the school or the photographer would be the owner of that copyright. And that's something that you really need to consider. 2068, Daniel? 1973. I'm sorry. You're right. 2068. Oh, boy, ask me to do math. I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician. So yes, you're right. 1973 plus 95 would be 2068. Yeah. Cool. So you got to get permission from whoever owns that copyright in that photo of the school classroom. Odds are, and this is one of those weird things in copyright law, odds are the school did not acquire ownership of the copyrights. And so it's probably the photographer or photo studio. Now, as a practical matter, are they ever going to know about this? Are they ever going to do anything? Is the studio still in existence? Who owns the copyright? It could be a very tricky, complicated thing to chase around. And I'm not going to advise you one way or the other, but the best thing you can do is go get that permission if you can. Let me see. I'm going to do, I think, one or two more of these questions. Well, here's a thing from Steve, who's a little less than, it's not so much a question, but I'm going to opine on it anyway. He says, it infuriates me to see First Amendment auditors disrespect people who don't want to be on their YouTube channel. When they're told the person doesn't want to be filmed or that they don't have consent, these people start a fight and argue over it. To me, this is stripping others of their free will and freedom of choice, and the auditor is forcing them on their will onto someone else while demanding that their rights be respected. It would be much more mature to simply let the person know you'll blur them and then actually do so, instead of creating a conflict and turn the camera on the person who's now upset, make them the subject of the video. To me, YouTube is commercial, as they offer products and services through ads, or you pay for ad-free. So when someone publishes their video to YouTube, it's inherently commercial in nature, and these auditors need to blur out faces. People don't like having cameras shoved in their face, and people don't like being filmed and forced onto YouTube. I'm afraid if this is not addressed, it's going to lead to violence and people are going to get hurt. So, and he's asking me, would I please make a video addressing First Amendment auditors specifically? Who claim to be independent journalists and refuse to respect the privacy of others and force them onto YouTube while screaming about their rights. It's such a simple compromise, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, well, Steve, I'm sorry to say on this one, I come down on the side of those auditors. If you are in a public place, a government-run facility, out in public, on the public streets, those kinds of things, you do not have an expectation that your activities, your appearance, that any of it is private. Okay? So that means that anybody who wants to can film, photograph, sketch, whatever they want of you. They can record you, those kinds of things. And they do not need your consent or permission to do so. Moreover, they don't need any permission or consent to use the material in an editorial, storytelling kind of a context. I hear your point that YouTube is monetized and has ads and those kinds of things, and itself sometimes is a paid product. And unfortunately, that is just not how the law works. The First Amendment applies to that just as though it was a newspaper. Could you imagine saying the same thing? I don't want you to use that photograph of me engaged in whatever activity I'm engaged in the newspaper. And your newspaper's commercial because you sell it and you have ads in it. Well, yeah, but the storytelling of the newspaper, if it's news, it's news. And in my view on this particular subject, these First Amendment auditors, while their approach is somewhat questionable and very confrontational in many instances, and most of the people that they're confronting, at least that I see, tend to be officers of the law. So they're public officials, and that adds another wrinkle to things. Public officials engaged in the performance of their duties have absolutely no expectation that they can stop or conceal the evidence of the portrayals of what they've been doing. So But anyway, so it's confrontational style, and it's a well-worn journalistic style. Calling themselves journalists, that may be a little bit of an exaggeration or a little bit of an expansion of the term what is a journalist, but the point is they are sharing what's important information about how people and governments don't respect one of these fundamental rights, the fundamental right to freedom of speech and of the press. So sorry, Steve, I don't agree with you entirely on this. I agree with you that it would be easy enough to blur things out, but then that undermines the validity, the credibility, the effectual nature of the video itself, of the storytelling. So there you go. I guess wear a mask, conceal your identity if you're going out and you don't want to be shown. So what else have I got here? Let me see if I can get one or two more. Should you trademark the title of your podcast to help prevent someone else using it? If so, how do I do that when I live in Canada, but I want to cover the trademark as far as possible? Sharon, the question is this. Yes, should you trademark the title of your podcast? If your title is a distinctive name, brand that sets you apart, that identifies you as the source of your content, it is definitely worth registering a trademark to protect yourself against others using it or a confusingly similar title. How do you protect yourself across borders? Well, trademark is one of those things that's territorial. So if you're in Canada, you can certainly register in Canada. That's not going to prevent someone in the US from adopting a similar name. Likewise, someone in Australia or Bulgaria, right? So you have to make some judgment calls about where do you want to register. My typical recommendation for podcasters and YouTube creators is protect yourself where the largest part of your audience is located, because that's where the confusion is going to do its harm, right? If someone comes along and starts a show in the US that is the same title as yours, and people go looking and find theirs instead of yours, and theirs is crap and yours is terrific, well, people are going to think that yours is crap. That confusion is troublesome. So I would say register in the US. You can do so if you are a foreign national, and as long as you are doing, in commerce in the United States, and publishing videos, publishing audio is in fact in commerce for those purposes. So that's my quick take on whether and how to register. You do have to register on a territorial basis. Unfortunately, there's just no working around that. But it isn't that hard. It just tends to be an expensive thing. So choose your battles, I guess. Pick your locales carefully. So, any other questions from the live audience before I call it a night and sign off? We've been on board for about 40 minutes, and I think I need to get back to some other things here. All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you to you, Daniel, for your questions, and to those who wrote in with questions. And I will be back again next week, probably on Tuesday at the same time, barring the unforeseen. And I'll look forward to another session of Entertainment Law Asked and Answered live here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.